So let's welcome Michael McHale, President and CEO of St. Paul Senior Services, and Todd Kaprielian, CEO of St. Paul's Senior Services Foundation.
Thank you so much, and thank all of you for joining us this morning. Gosh, so you can see the name St. Paul Senior Services. You see our logo there, no? Right over here. Yeah, St. Paul's. Well, it's not a coincidence that St. Paul's Cathedral, St. Paul's Senior Services. I don't know if you're aware of the history. If you don't mind, indulge me for a moment. A little bit of a brief look back. It was back in the late 1950s. The rector of St. Paul's Parish, the cathedral, he noticed that elderly members of the parish were no longer coming to church services. They weren't coming to Bible study. They weren't participating in the church. And so it was back in the day, back in the 50s, when you did make house calls. And Father Robinson would go and visit parishioners and see what's happening. He just started to see, you know what, they're starting to isolate, self-isolate. And it's just not good. They're not eating well, they're not socializing. It's just not a good situation. So he goes back to the vestry, the lay members of the church, and said, this is what I'm seeing happen. And a few others said, you know what, I'm seeing that in our respective professions. So this was something that was popping up for people in general. So he said, okay, what are we going to do about it? Nice. So they had an idea. What if we had a retirement community? All right, nice idea. Where are we going to build it? Don't know. Do we have any money to do that? No, we don't. Okay, good idea, but at least you got to start somewhere, you know. And then two things happened. The first one was a parishioner passed away in the church. And she left her property to the church. And she said, you keep talking about building a community. Here's a place for you to build it. And it was on the corner of 2nd and Nutmeg. So right now, where you go to St. Paul's Manor, that property right there on the corner, that was the start of it all. So now I was talking with Father Robinson's widow, and she said, you know what, that changed everything. Because now, after church services, we could walk people over there and say, this is where we're going to build. Oh, that started to change the conversation, started to really spark imagination. Well, fast forward also, same time, HUD was coming online, Housing and Urban Development. They hadn't opened their offices yet, but they started to take out advertisements saying, hey, we're looking for church groups or service clubs that want to have low-income housing for seniors. And so the parishioners are saying, hey, okay, I think that's a good fit for us. A little more conversation. St. Paul's Manor was the first HUD loan in the state of California back in 1960. Yeah. So now we got money for construction and we have land. And we're off to the races. So it was that relationship that started with St. Paul's Parish. When HUD got involved, they said, okay, separation church and state, you need to create a nonprofit organization. And so that's what they did. So that was always been this legacy relationship with the cathedral. It's one that still continues today. We have a robust relationship behind the scenes over the course of the year, and we're very pleased to have this spiritual relationship with all of you. And so it's an honor for us when we can come and kind of give you an update or a report on what direction St. Paul's Senior Services is going, and just letting you know how you can be involved. So that's why we're here today, really. So two things before we start our presentation. So now brief, okay, so St. Paul's, nice. What do you do exactly? So I'm going to give it to you in a nutshell. On one side, we have housing. So we mentioned the manor, we have the villa, we have the McHale Health Center. So we have independent living, assisted living, memory care, and then skilled nursing. So we really have the whole spectrum of needs. Okay, so we have all of that. We have information in the back about our housing programs, and you can pick up information there. On the other side, maybe you've heard of it, it's called St. Paul's PACE. St. Paul's PACE. And this is an all-inclusive healthcare program for very low-income, Medi-Cal eligible, very frail people with multiple health conditions. And when I say multiple, I'm talking for 10, 12, 13 different health conditions. Yeah, very complex health conditions who live in the area. So they enroll in the program and they receive all-inclusive health care. It's really a phenomenal program. If I were to tell you the laundry list of everything they do, you would go, oh my gosh. It's a very impressive program. We receive funding from McHale and Medicare. Okay, we'll talk a little bit about that later on as we go into our presentation. So we have those two programs. Again, if you wanted more information, the lovely Karina back there, she has her hand up. She can absolutely answer your questions, and if you want to talk more on Monday, she can arrange that for you. Very good. So why don't we move on then to our next slide. Okay, so I'm going to hand things over to our CEO, Mike McHale, and he's going to talk to us about what we have here in front of us.
Thanks, Todd. Good morning, everyone. Certainly it's a pleasure to be with all of you this morning. One of the things that I worried about when I learned the history of St. Paul's, and when I found out that Father Robinson made house calls to find out why people weren't coming to church. This is my home church, but I moved to Descanso, so I knew Penny couldn't come out there or wouldn't come out there to check on me to see why I'm not in church on Sunday. But it certainly is a pleasure to be with all of you today. As we were started, as the history of our organization, we were created to solve problems. The congregation here at St. Paul's is a problem-solving congregation. They look at the needs of the community and they try to figure out what's our response to what's going on. And this has continued for over 65 years for us at St. Paul's. And one of the things that we're beginning to look at now over the last couple of years, really focused on, is what's happening in our country and what's happening for seniors in particular. And it's kind of scary in a way, and I don't mean to be the bearer of bad news on a Sunday morning, but we're seeing a phenomenon that's taking place as the final baby boom generation moves into retirement. And so the data that we've been looking at in the first box up there is the demographics of aging in the United States. For the first time in the history of our country, we'll have seniors as the largest part of our population ever in our history, right? What started happening in 2011 is that 10,000 people a day were turning 65. And that phenomenon goes on for 19 years straight. So all this talk that we're hearing about from Washington and Sacramento is because this is moving through and playing through, right? 10,000 people a day. We've got this demographic shift. And what do you get when you turn 65? Medicare and Social Security, two of the biggest government benefits that we've all paid for, start to play through. Both of those benefits were set up for a life expectancy of 7 years. When they were designed, life expectancy was 72. Right now, life expectancy in California, we have the second highest life expectancy, is a little over 81 years. If you want to live to a little over 82 years, you've got to move to Hawaii, to outliving California. But these benefits were set up in a way that the infrastructure of how they were set up to collect the funds hasn't changed, even though life expectancy has changed. And so in that second slide, we're in this good news, bad news paradigm, right? The good news is we're living longer. The bad news is we're living longer, right? We're living longer with an illness. We've not cured anything. We've just been able to better manage the diseases that you have so that you can live with them for a longer period of time. A great example of this is HIV/AIDS. In my lifetime, when that disease was first discovered, it was an immediate death sentence. Now people can live for years and years and years and years and decades with that diagnosis because of our interventions that we've created. The same can be said about diabetes or COPD or CHF. We've been able, cancer, many of the cancer diagnoses, we've been able to prolong how long people can live with those diseases. So on average, those of us over the age of 65 will live with at least one chronic disease. The majority of us will live with 2 or more chronic diseases as we age. And the challenge with that is the more medical intervention you have to have, the more money you have to pay out because of that, right? Medicare doesn't pay for everything. The third thing is the size of the population as it relates to everybody else. So you can see in that graph chart over there, the orange box is senior population over the age of 65. We're getting larger percentage of the population. But what's interesting about that is the other demographic, under 18, is going down. And why is that important? They're the tax base, right? That's the future tax base. We all know how the government plans are set up, that what I pay into today is not for me, it's for the current beneficiaries, and it's the people coming behind me, what they pay in that will ensure my benefits, right? But if that's declining, you're not going to have enough tax base. You've got this perfect storm that's being set up in our country. You've got this population that's getting older. They're living with chronic diseases longer. You've got a shrinking tax base. We need more help and supports and services for our seniors, but you don't have enough revenue coming in to pay for it. So that's somewhat the basis of the conversation that's taking place in Washington right now, is how are we going to deal with all of this as the population begins to age. The real interesting demographic is that the baby boomers in the tail end, those of us born between 1959 and 1964, the government is watching that group real closely. And the reason they are is because we're the first group coming into retirement without pensions. We're coming in on our savings and our 401ks, right? The challenge is, I remember being 22 years old. I went to work for Delta Airlines. I remember being in orientation, and they're going, we've got this great benefit. It's called a 401k. And I'm like, wow, what's the K stand for? We don't know, but it's a really good program. And we're like, well, what's it for? It's for you to save for your retirement. Great. How much do I need to save? We don't know. The challenge for that population coming through right now is that they've not saved enough. And so they're moving into retirement. The average savings for that cohort is $200,000. If you think about it, so the intention of our savings accounts are you don't want to touch the corpus of your savings. You want to live off the throw-off from that investment. Well, at $200,000, you're not getting much of a throw-off. And so you're really becoming dependent on Social Security to pay for that. But the other challenge is, as we age and we need more supports and services, where does the money come from that the government doesn't pay for? It comes out of our savings. So $200,000 will get you about 2 years in a memory care facility if that's where you need to go. And if you're a married couple, you've got to support 2 households, and so you've got enough for one. And the unfortunate news is us men, we tend to live shorter. We tend to be more needy because I want everything I want. And unfortunately, the surviving spouse will live at a lower economic level into retirement. So that's what we're seeing in the future. The challenge right now, too, is that everything that's happening in Washington right now is beginning to accelerate this, right? We've got insecurity around Medicare. For the first time now, they're starting to talk about the big, beautiful bill and touching Medicare, right? Medicaid is already, we're looking at an $880 billion cut to Medicaid, which many seniors rely on as a subsidy to their health care benefits. We're looking at about 11 million people in our country losing their health insurance at a time when people can't afford to lose their health insurance. So everything is being accelerated. We thought we had about 5 years to get ready for it. We want to share with you what we're doing to get ready for this, but it's starting to happen today. And so we've got to figure out how do we respond as an Episcopal affiliated organization, but how do we respond to the needs of our neighbors into the future. So I'll turn it back to you, Todd.
Thank you, Michael. Okay, any questions so far before? That was a great slide, a lot of information there. Wasn't that kind of eye-opening? Usually when we do these, people, okay. Any questions? Any questions? No. Okay. As we've done presentations to the community we realized that we needed to have something to help us really understand the situation. So we had this fictitious couple, Betty and Henry, and you can see Betty and Henry is all of us, regardless of demographic here. And so what happened with Betty and Henry? Well, at the age of 65, they sold their home. They said, oh, we need to do too much upkeep on the home. It's just better off, let's sell it. We can rent. Well, the market's really hot right now. Nice. So they did, and so they have a nice little nest egg. And they're feeling pretty good. They've been blessed with relatively good health. They don't have too many of those chronic conditions that Michael is referring to, so things are looking good. But it's amazing of just the reversal of fortunes that can happen as you get into your later years. Is that one catastrophic health condition, maybe it's a stroke, maybe it's a heart attack, but it starts emotional, that suddenly we have a declining assets. Michael referenced that. You start off with a nice nest egg. You're trying to live within your means. You're trying to live with whatever the proceeds are from the fund. But on occasion, you need to start tapping into those assets. And that's what happens here with Betty and Henry. Eventually, Henry does need memory care. And as Michael said, now you're paying for 2 households. Okay, it's starting to become really catastrophic for Betty. So he passes away, Henry, and now Betty's at a place where she doesn't have a lot of assets. And what's happening in San Diego? Cost of living going up, inflation, crazy inflation, rent going up. And what do we start to see? People over 55, people over 65 starting to become homeless. Now, the really sad statistic, we just had the point-in-time count, so that happens every January here in San Diego. The information was released a couple weeks ago. So the good news is, overall homelessness down 7%. Nice. That's what we're looking for, a downward trend. The upward trend is people over 55 for the first time becoming homeless. That was up 4%. So we were already at 30% of the homeless were over 55. Now they're saying bump that number up to 34. Yikes. So this is the situation that we see. Not only what's happening on a national level, on a state level of just the changing demographics of the elderly, but now suddenly for what's happening locally, because we all know San Diego is not a cheap place to live. So we have this phenomena going on. Okay, how do we start to address, how would we help Betty and Henry? How would we help them earlier on before their resources are depleted? So right now, socially, we're saying, we got to help Betty who's having to live in her car. Absolutely, we need to help Betty. But we also are asking, can we go upstream for a moment? Can we go a few years before that circumstance happens? And can we slow it down? Maybe even get lucky and avoid it altogether. So that's the question that we have on our mind. Would you like to?
So this phenomena, there's actually a name. We have names for everything, but this phenomena, you'll start to hear more about it. We're seeing more and more articles in the national press about this. It's called the hidden middle. So if you think about Betty and Henry, they lived in the middle class their entire life. They didn't have extravagant jobs, but they had enough money to get through life, right? They got married, they bought a home here in San Diego, they raised their family, they supported their church, they put their kids through schools, but they used all of their resources for day-to-day to get through life, right? Henry, we used him as an example. He had $200,000 in savings, right? When they sold their home, which was paid off, they bought it back in the 1960s, it was worth $1 million. So they combined that $200,000 with that $1 million, and they were living off the proceeds from that plus Social Security, so that's what was giving them their monthly income. But over time, as Henry got sick, they were having to tap into that reserve account, and when you tap it and take money out, it lowers your monthly income because it's not throwing off as much money as they move through this. So this phenomenon called the hidden middle is what we're seeing play through. It's people, again, who are squarely in the middle class their entire life, but in retirement, they're going through their proceeds pretty quickly. So that's what we're seeing as a housing provider and a healthcare provider of what's happening in the lives of our folks. It is estimated that 30% of the seniors in our community will experience this. So when you look at that rising demographic in San Diego, what that plays through, in early 2030, folks over the age of 65 will be 1 million of the San Diego population of 3 million, right? And if 30% is estimated, that's over 300,000 people in San Diego County who could be at risk for this. And we think that demographic, that statistic of the increase in homelessness, is the tip of the iceberg of what's playing through right now. So, how do we address this stuff?
Thank you, Michael. All right, so the next slide, we have a few things going on. Let me walk you through it. We envision a healthcare model that will help you navigate your already existing healthcare. Whatever your plan is, maybe you're with Kaiser, maybe you're with Sharp, with Scripps, you name it. You have your traditional health plan. What we've found is that there are many sticking points, if you will, points of aggravation that prevent you from really leveraging all of the benefits of that health plan. So we said, well, what if we started to address what those sticking points are? And that's this pie chart of services that we have. So as a PACE provider here in San Diego, the PACE model says, what is the barrier that prevents older adults from accessing healthcare? And they figured it all out. So we've taken that model to create this outer ring of services to be able to address those needs for everybody. So enhanced care coordination. You have the easier access to providers. I don't know about you, but you call in, you say, hey, I need to see my primary care physician. Great, it's going to be a 2.5-month wait. It's like, okay, that's not timely. I need to speak with him or with her sooner than that. Disease progression, that's a really important one. Because as Michael was saying, that we have chronic conditions. And those chronic conditions, we know statistically what's going to happen. We know if I have COPD, what will happen over time. We can, as healthcare providers, start to anticipate and meet the needs of somebody with these health conditions. So if we have a model of care that's proactive, that's helping you monitor your health conditions, we stand a better chance of not letting those start to escalate. Because when they escalate, that's when falls start to happen. That's when you have hospitalizations. So now we have a fighting chance of being able to curtail some of the need for some of those hospitalizations or re-hospitalizations. Medication management, I don't know about you, but keeping track of how often I need to take the purple pill, that can be a challenge unto itself. If I have multiple pills that I need to take, yeah. Life care coaching, expanded caregiver. So all of these services are things that we do over at St. Paul's PACE, that all-inclusive healthcare program. So our thinking was, PACE is great, but you need to have multiple chronic health conditions to be eligible for PACE. You have to be really low income to be able to be enrolled in PACE. Well, what if we had this kind of model for everybody over the age of 65? What if something like this was available to everybody as a Medicare benefit? So that's kind of the big picture. What that will do is it'll help Betty and Henry maybe not avoid the heart attack, but at the very least be able to prepare them and help Betty in helping Henry manage the after effects of the heart attack. It's little things like this that can escalate and produce really big results in people's health care if we start to anticipate more and more. So this model is very proactive. I don't know about you, but in my traditional health plan, if I don't call my doctor and say, I'm here for my annual checkup, it never happens. 2 years goes by. They never call me. 3 years go by. 5 years go by. They don't call me. I need to initiate. Well, what if we had a system that's a little more proactive, saying, hey, Todd, you haven't come to your Your annual checkup, what's going on? Oh yeah, I've been meaning to do that. Okay, so now we have a system that's a little more responsive, a lot more proactive, saying, let's not wait for a condition to occur. When Todd's suddenly at the ER, he's suddenly not saying, I need some help at the hospital, but rather we're reaching out and really helping him manage his health care. So it's a very active, participatory model that we're suggesting. So the really important point here is that we're not trying to replace healthcare. We're not trying to say to healthcare providers, you need to start doing something different. You keep doing it. But if this is a benefit from Medicare, now that is going to help you really leverage and access the services of your health plan. So that's our vision of, okay, wouldn't it be great if we can start to have this extra layer of services? So that's the vision. Okay, well, great. That's a nice vision, right? Good ideas, just like, that'd be nice to have a retirement community. Okay, so what's the next step? Well, for us, we have some really serious ambitions. We think this is significant. We don't see anybody talking about things quite the way that we're talking about them. There are a lot of different models that people are experimenting with, but they're not quite using the proactive healthcare of the PACE model. So that's where we get really excited. We feel like we have something to add to the conversation of how to improve our healthcare system. Okay, well, that's great if you have these ambitions and such. So what is the next step? The next step would be to prove it. You got an idea. Wouldn't it be great if you could do an academic study and prove your model of care to start to get the attention of policy advisors? People are saying, you know what, we need to spend our money, our healthcare dollars more effectively. We need to get a better result from our healthcare dollars. Well, that's what we're pointing to here. We're saying, in the long run, you're going to save Betty and Henry money. You're going to save those precious resources at our hospitals and urgent care units and our clinics. You're going to save money that way to pay for something that's more proactive that happens at the age of 65. Okay, so what are we doing? We're St. Paul Senior Services, we're commissioning 2 studies. One with SDSU, this one's starting up here in a month or 2, and that one's going to be about caregiver support. Believe it or not, we got caregivers, unpaid people who are helping their spouses, their parents, grandparents manage their health care. They're doing grocery shopping for them, they're taking them to appointments, they're making appointments for them. All of those things, they have a vital role. And believe it or not, we're not really sure how best to support them. How to give them the education so they can be effective in their role as a caregiver. All they know is that I'm the adult son and my mom needs help. And I'm here stepping up and I don't know what I'm doing. Okay, well, we're going to work with a model of providing healthcare coaching. A model that's going to help that caregiver be more effective in helping the needs of their loved one. Could be a parent, could be a family member, could be a parishioner here, could be a neighbor. But these services are going to help them get a better idea of how to effectively provide services. So we're going to be really excited about this one. And this will be about a 2.5 year study over at SDSU. The larger one, as you can see with UCSD, now we're really looking at the model. So we have 2 researchers at UCSD, nice. They've recruited a primary care physician within UCSD Health. And he said, all right, I will serve a focus group a study group of 30 people. We will provide these services. I'm dialed in with the system. I understand what you're trying to do. We're going to have some good partnership here. And for 2.5 years, we're going to do a demonstration study. And if the results there are promising, then we're going to do a full-blown study. The whole point is that this will start to prove the efficacy of this model. And that's what we need to start showing people. That, hey, if you do something proactive, like we do over in the PACE program, they got it right there. Let's just replicate it for everybody else. This isn't a big deal. We think that we can move a mountain. So this is where we get really excited about what we have in store for us. St. Paul Senior Services, what did I say earlier? Well, we're a housing provider, St. Paul's PACE, and we commission research. We're starting to go into that area. Why? Because we don't see people asking the kind of questions we feel that need to be asked. What does the proactive model look like? what does it start to look like? I've been at St. Paul's for 21 years this October. And we've always talked about, wouldn't it be great if we had a PACE Light program, something for everybody? And we'd all say, oh yes, and our eyes would get big and we'd get really excited. PACE Light, yeah, we want that, we want that. Okay, so what exactly are we talking about when we say that? Crickets. People intuitively knew what they would like to see happen. When Michael came on board 3 years ago, he started to say, I think it looks like this. Let's start to really feel this out, and are we onto something? So we've been doing these focus groups now. We've done 13 of them. We're going to do a 14th next week. And talking to people in the community and saying, this is our vision. What do you think? And getting feedback. And so that's really helped us evolve our narrative about what it is that we want to achieve here with this model. But this is the exciting time that we're in, and we're really pleased that you're allowing us to share this story with you.
The other piece of the pie that we've not fully hit on is that stable housing. You know, for all of us, if you have health insurance and have good health, but you don't have sustainable, affordable housing, you don't have enough. If you have housing but don't have adequate health care, you don't have enough. You need both. And when we look at the senior population, particularly that 30%, the hidden middle that we're talking about, as your income is going down, what are your rents doing? Going up, right? You know, the challenge as a housing provider is we still have to take care of the building, we still have to pay the staff, we still have to put reserves aside for future needs for that building, and if you don't have a profit, you can't do all of those things. But the challenge to us is, how do you actually design a building where the rents go down as people's income goes down, if we want to adequately and safely keep them housed over time? So the other experiment, along with these two that we're doing with the university, is now looking at designing housing and subsidies to support that housing so that the rents can actually mirror the individual's income, so that they can stay longer. There's nothing worse than, Ann and I were talking earlier, as we were going through COVID, we were really challenged financially. We had to increase our rents. And as a team at St. Paul's, we're sitting there going, how many people are we pushing out the door because we have to raise rents? But we had to raise rents, right? Wages went up, cost of buildings gone up, everything's gone up. And so we're looking now at social investment funds, developing a social investment fund to help us to offset the cost of running that building so that we can actually start to see rents go down. As I was explaining to Ann earlier, I'm like, Ann, it's so frustrating because everything we're talking about is 5 to 10 years out. People who need it today, we don't have it today. We're trying to build the infrastructure to allow us to do that. Are there questions about this? But he was awake.
Well, God bless you for what you're doing, starting at the local level. I'm thinking of the quote by Jonathan Swift, that vision is the ability to see the invisible. And you're doing that. And I just, you know, and you haven't even talked about tax cuts and you know, tariffs. And I assume that given the age of the president and most congressional leaders, they're not targeting aging people. They're like they are women and, you know, DEI issues. But, you know, as a healthcare provider from UCSD, I mean, it's 6 months or wait list time, not 3 months,
Right.
frankly. But no, I haven't seen the data, but I must say, just by hearsay, the PACE program has really taken off and done very well.
You know, the challenge is with and I'm going to stay apolitical here. We don't know what the cuts look like yet, right? We know that PACE in the state of California, the governors may revise cut PACE by funding by $16 million, and that this is before Medicare has made their changes. So if we're looking at a $880 billion cut to Medicaid, what we think is going to happen is people will be kicked off. And so less people will be eligible for the benefit. They may raise the income level or asset levels. So Betty and Henry certainly were not eligible early on for any of these benefits, but as they're moving through spending down their dollars, Betty is getting closer to eligibility, but she still had too much money in the bank.
Closer, not further. Close.
Is that good? There you go. Okay, great. So we don't know what it looks like yet. So we're doing a lot of work. We'd like to ask you to help us to do some work in lobbying our elected officials. And Todd will explain that to you in a minute. But sir, can I answer a question for you?
For me. Okay. Thank you. I usually can be heard anyway. But not online. You can be heard online.
Right here? Okay. For those of us who are veterans and have some interaction with the VA, how does that work with you?
So the good news is too, on the housing front, what we're really encouraged by is the veteran population, the homeless veteran population is starting to go down. So we're really pleased with the interventions that the government has taken up to this point. Now all of that stops this year because funding stops for that. But we're really pleased to see that the veteran community. The good news is that they're opening up PACE to the veterans. So if you get your health care through TRICARE or the Veterans Administration, and you meet the eligibility requirements for PACE, they're now going to open it up for veterans so they can get quicker access to care. So we're encouraged by that. The Elizabeth Dole Act is what enabled that to happen.
Michael, we do have a question in the back. This young lady, but the microphone was going a little crazy. But if you want to share your question.
Okay. Actually, having a microphone is great because I have no voice, and you can't sign. So, where we are now in this conversation, I think, is vital. The question I have is this: how is it you, not you personally, how is it we go about dealing with a Congress that is unwilling to do that which is right? I mean, it's fine to say right them, but that doesn't really work. So my question is, what is PACE doing to enable people to be effective in dealing with a Congress that is unwilling to buck the president?
You know, it's a great question and a challenging question at this time, right? We have our voices. We have our ability to use the power of the pen. We have the ability, I was encouraged 2 weekends ago in North Park when ICE showed up at a local restaurant and the neighborhood got up in arms and said, not in our neighborhood. And, you know, part of the challenge right now is, as nonprofit organizations who are dependent on government funding, we're nervous. You know, in the Big Beautiful Bill, there's a piece of that legislation that gives the president the right to deny a nonprofit to be nonprofit. And we're worried about them going through our websites because we're big supporters of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and we're worried that they may cut off all of our funding and then we get to help no one. So it's a very interesting, precarious position. We're all hoping, I think, that the midterms have an opportunity for us to make changes, but what happens between now and then?
June 14th, No King's Day. Take to the streets, Waterfront Park, 10 a.m. There we start. Yeah.
So it's raising our voices, it's raising our profile, it's, you know, standing up. You see on television a lot of these community forums that representatives don't show up for. We've got to continue to do those things. But again, as a nonprofit provider who's very dependent on government funding to help the people that we help, we're nervous. We're nervous about our voice and what we can do and not do, and not get people angry at us for advocating in a direction that they don't feel is the right direction. Andrew, you had something to...
Well, that issue that she wisely talked about is one that is like what Jesus said, the poor you have with you always. There will always be opposition for a while to government-funded care, and that's where it's got to end eventually. And so I remember back in the 1958 or so, we had a nursing home, and we were struggling with the county about rates and so forth. And there eventually was enough of us that we were able to say that either you swing our way or you won't get reelected. And believe you me, they heard that message. And so we were able to get food deliveries in the rural areas of Oregon and various other things. And it's a challenge, but we can win it.
You know, Andrew, always having you in the audience, you're like the conscience, and you know, you always have these great stories. Andrew and Brother Barnabas were on St. Paul's Board of Directors. You know, we'd always talk about business. Do we expand PACE or not? You know, and okay, Wayne, the bottom line and all. But then, you know, you'd have people like Andrew, like Barnabas saying, "May I say something?" And here's been my lifelong lesson. This will always be a challenge, and it'll always be there. So let's, you know, not try to say, oh, it shouldn't be there, because that's not really going to be productive. You have to say, how do I address it here and now? And just always, just a wealth of wisdom and just sobriety, I'll just say it that way. But, you know, one thing I have seen is that somebody said, don't underestimate the power of the phone call. Don't underestimate the power of the letter. I know sometimes it feels like that's a little too passive. You know, okay, yeah, I'll make the effort to do it, but it's not enough. It's like, oh, you want to put your body on the line and you want to participate in a protest and really say, hey, this is a voice here that says no, and really being able to do that. But don't underestimate the power of letter writing. And it's on that note that if you did want to participate, we do have a request. And right now, as Michael had mentioned, okay, Medicaid, all right, we call it Medi-Cal here in California. Okay, it's at risk of being cut. All right. Well, you can send in a letter. You can make your voice heard about, hey, we need to protect these programs. These are helping very low income, very frail seniors. Now I see some of you with their code. We do have copies of the flyer with that QR code, so we do have that information in the back. We even went a step further, and thank you, Dean Penny, she was here earlier. We have a letterhead, cathedral letterhead, and it says, I'm a parishioner here at St. Paul's Cathedral, and I believe that we need to protect these programs. So if you wanted to take a copy of that letter, put in your information. They're going to want to know what's your address, because they do check these things. That's just part of the process. And you can make your voice heard. And in fact, if you need help figuring out who's your legislature, who's your person that you really should address this to, we can help you do that. So we have that in the table in the back there. So we're able to provide that. We also have the flyer if you just want to take the letter now and do the QR code later. Absolutely. Yes, Pat?
Whoops. There we go. Well, I have been on the board in one capacity or another for about 13 years. And it is a privilege. I feel it's a privilege to be on the board. St. Paul Senior Services does something amazing and wonderful every day, many times over. And I just want to encourage everyone here to stay totally informed in the direction that St. Paul's Senior Services is going when it comes to our senior health care, and support them in any way that you can. They truly, truly make a huge difference.
Thank you. We have a question up front. Yes, thank you. Oh.
I typed in the letter that you have already, and already sent it. That's what I was doing up here, being so weird. But I wanted to offer to anyone, if you want to give me your email address, I will pop that over to you, and then you can just cut and paste it instead of having to retype it. So if you want to see me after it's over and give me your email address, I'll do that.
In the letter that we have today, you can just write your name in, but you can use that piece of paper and send it in if you choose to send it by mail.
Good morning. There's an expression that I've known all of my life. Better? Sorry. Man proposes, but God disposes. And I too am grateful for St. Paul and for the seniors here. It doesn't matter what they think they want to do in Washington. We as a community, as a spiritual community, have the power, and God is on our side. I believe this immensely. And make that phone call. I used to write letters to the editor of our local newspaper all the time until they changed their direction, and then they wouldn't take my letters anymore because I had something to say. So we can say it in prayer, and God is listening to all of us. Thank you so much.
I want to thank Todd. You don't remember me, but he's from St. Paul for about 6 years. I want to thank you guys for what Lisa's doing. I've seen the improvements. I really think that from Cheryl and from other people that work at St. Paul. And I think you're doing a tremendous job. I just hope we don't lose no more money to keep the program going. And I hope that St. Paul's is at a committee that we stop with writing, send letters to legislators, send letters to anybody who can do something about Congress. No matter where you live here, or you live all those other states like I do, you can go to those people and get Trump out of office as soon as possible.
Did we have a question in the back, I think? Or, Ellen? Yes.
Just a quick question. I notice here it's california.gov and our legislature preaching to the choir.
Right now, in the governor's May revise, that's what we're most worried about right now. There's a $60 million cut to PACE. So right now, the immediate focus, because we know tangentially what's happening in Washington until we got to work the Senate right now to get the Medi-Cal cuts stopped. But we don't yet know what that's going to look like. We do know what it's going to look like in California. So the immediate need is California. But we also need to be working our federal legislators to stop the Medi-Cal cuts that are taking place.
Well, of course, I had another question, just somewhat related to what you just said. Isn't PACE working toward keeping people in their own homes?
Yes.
Right? To what extent is that going forward? And to what extent do you think that would help with the financial burden on PACE to begin with?
So what's really, really interesting, and I don't want to get too technical, but PACE is the reimbursement for PACE. The eligibility for PACE is for folks who would normally go into a nursing home. So they've got enough chronic conditions going on that the default mechanism that we have right now, the only housing that the government technically would pay for is nursing home. So we're discounted off of what it normally would have cost the government to put somebody in a nursing home, and the eligibility is you have to be living in the community currently. So it's a discount off what the government normally would have to pay. What's really interesting, and I didn't know this until a couple weeks ago, Medicare Advantage cost us as taxpayers 22% more than Medicare and fee-for-service. And so now they're finally starting to have some conversation. PACE is not allowed in all 50 states. It's only in 32 states. And only 75,000 people take advantage of PACE in the 32 states that allow it. In those 32 states, the population that's eligible for it is 2.5 million people. And so it's really underutilized, but it is a savings, because if the government would have had to put these people into a nursing home, that's going to cost a lot of money. So we're hoping that smarter minds will prevail and look at the true cost. Right now what they're looking at is, here's an expense, how can we just reduce the expense? Versus, here's an expense, but what would happen if we don't have this and we have to go into the system? What's interesting right now, it's the health insurance companies that are bucking Medi-Cal cuts, and it's the hospitals. Because if they throw them off our service, they're going to show up in the ER. If they show up in the ER and the hospital's losing money, they're going to pass it along to the health plans to subsidize and pay for it. So what we're most concerned about is they're not thinking through the long-term ramifications of what this decision will mean. And that's what we're trying to remind them of. I know we're getting close to the 10 o'clock service, and I need to get good with God this Sunday. I know if I can get, but I just want to leave you with this. You know, it was Margaret Mead that said, never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. It is the only thing that ever has. And so we've got to come together as a community. We have to activate our voices in whichever way we feel most comfortable with. But I think that we as a society can do better. The fact that we're seeing an increase in homelessness in our seniors is horrible, right? And as a religious community, as a spiritual community, we're called by our Maker to take care of the least of those amongst us. And the reality is it could be us. And so we have to act now to make a decision to care about our brothers and sisters, because we can do better. So I just want to thank you for your time this morning. Thank you for your continued support of the cathedral, the support of the services that the Episcopal Church offers in our community. We can do better. So thank you.